art scene where, oh, sorry, the machine spoke to me. I was confused for a moment. So I professionally make queer LARPs in the art scene where we call them participatory art, and as a hobby in the LARP scene. I'm also a professional comic artist. I do queer and poly activist comics, and I am queer, poly, kinky, non-binary, and go by they, them pronouns. In my free time, I play PC and console and table games and tabletop RPG and LARPs, and I have a lifelong experience in being a part of a minority and gaming. Now, I'm of the radical opinion that we need queer exclusive games where the player cannot choose to have a straight experience. And in my speech today, I'm shortly trying to convince you of this. We can debate after. Now, I think often in games, we think that they are queer inclusive when there is an option to play as a queer character. Now, definitely this is better than to not have queer characters at all. But if queer is just an option, the story most likely is not about the recognizable queer experience at all. Because unless the narratives in the game have been done twice on the level of doing two separate games, it's going to be a majority narrative. They are majority representing stories that can be played as a queer character. For a moment, you could just try to take any queer experience you can figure out and think whether it could be played as a straight character. For example, if the story is of coming out as gay and a tragedy where a teen gay boy gets thrown out of their home, could that story be told as a straight character? Nope. So, like, minority experiences can't really be told with straight or majority representing protagonists. So without queer exclusivity, queer stories and experiences cannot be represented or told. And if all games have a safe space for straight people to be straight, we don't get to tell about the queers. We just get queers going through straight plot lines and experiences. For example, me and my colleague Willi von Nissinen created a game, participatory arts piece, out of Tom of Finland's arts influence in the fight for liberation of Finnish gay men. And that specific story could not be told with any straight characters in it. In stories where queer is as a tag glued on some characters, you can't tell about experiences like discrimination inside a minority or internalized homophobia or how it feels like when your sexuality is an illness and other important experiences. And just to underline why, once again, majority folks don't experience these things. They don't need to constantly process not fitting society's norms. And we might think that does this only apply to games that are focused on narratives? I don't think so. Even if you are doing a Super Mario-like platformer, it still matters because even Super Mario is a straight story. There is a man saving a princess. It's not Mario saving Luigi or a princess saving a princess. And I have to say that even if the platformer, there would be a princess saving a princess, and in the end of each level, the princesses would kiss and hearts would be flying. The straight folks would be like, oh, they're just roommates. Or if it was Mario saving Luigi and with the kiss and hearts, they would be, okay, they're really good friends from a culture where friends kiss on the lips. But even if so, all the queer kids who would be playing would go, oh, that's me. That they would feel that, hey, I have a space to exist in this world and it's right there in front of me. And that's irreplaceable. That is so important. There will always be so much majority representation that the straight folks will find it, and they can create a nice, safe, completely queer-free bubble for themselves. Ideally, this would be impossible, but you have to start somewhere if you want to expand what is acceptable. In many LARP projects that I worked in, where the stories in the focus are queer, I've often questioned the need to cater to straight folks at all. And because even if you are telling a story about the queer community, often at least a few straight characters are included. And the reason for this is that the creators are worried that straight people will not come to the game. And my argument is that not being able to play a queer character is queerphobic. Because it's playing, it's a game, it's fiction. Also, queer folks play straight people all the time, so it's not really that difficult. I think there are only bad excuses to stay in the straight comfort zone where nothing queer ever disturbs the peace. And do we really want to support that kind of a power balance where the majority can just not ever see minority experiences? Well, I don't. That's not how you change the world. And having token characters or the possibility to be queer in a straight story is not enough. And lastly, the question of money comes in. There's the worry that if too many straight folks who are queerphobic don't play the game without having a safe straight-only space, is it financially feasible? That actually is a real concern. And maybe in some cases it is true. But the only thing I can say to this, that in my experience is, if you create a queer exclusive safe space, the queers will come. They will fill it. The need for representation and safety and for actual queer stories and experiences to be told is huge. So in all my projects where I've taken this gamble, the queer folks who come in have triple or double the amount of the queer-phobic people who drop out. So it's not really a concern and maybe a gamble worth taking. I think that in its short is my input for today. Yes. So we maybe have a few minutes more for discussion. So please do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have a space for questions and discussion in the audience. Yes.
Hi.
Hello, my name's Ollie. I'm a trans man, bisexual. So I'm not coming in this from like a straight experience, but I do think that there is some space for straight stories within queer narratives, in the sense that there are a lot of queer people who are straight, or whether that's related to their gender identities or otherwise. So I do think that there is more to this also, like additionally to what you kind of explored. Yeah, I don't really have a question, just wanted to bring that up as a sort of like potential tangent for this discussion, because I think that we can't also forget that in our community.
Yeah, that's true. I do stress sort of. That is true.
yeah, it's I find myself also sometimes interchangeably using it with like, you know, non-queer. But yeah, I think it's interesting to also remember that those among us are still straight sometimes as well, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's it.
That's true. Yes, I non-queer or majority are better words. Because yes, there are straight queer people.
Yeah.
Mostly that as well.
Sure, Leland, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So first off, Nina, thank you so much for giving the talk. I think the idea of queer exclusive, imaginary worlds and characters and having non-queer people jump into it sounds great. I was kind of wondering about the idea of, how identity tourism kind of plays into your design choices. So if you have, for example, a game with like many non-queer players attempting to enter into these queer worlds or characters, and what they're ending up playing is not very queer because they don't actually know so much about how to embody that. How do you approach that kind of unqueering of the game or play based upon the player's approach to trying to enter into a queer imaginary?
Yes, so there is this risk of carnivalization, I think, not doing it respectfully. But otherwise, I think that if you try with respect, it's enough. If we start to, for example, in LARPs, if we in any case start to demand from unprofessionals like a perfect representation, it doesn't serve any purpose, because people are there to learn about themselves, learn about the experiences, so they don't have to be perfect. I think this fear is something that is stopping important experiences and communication to be shared. But if you tell a queer story, your responsibility of doing it with respect and being aware of your story's influence to the actual minorities situation right now. So that is the work that work you have to do. I don't know if this responds to your question completely, but maybe partially. But I'm not worried about straight people trying to pretend to be queer, because they do it because they want to understand it. So I think that's something we can allow, and which is a very good way of trying to understand it. If you have never LARPed, it's hard to understand, maybe.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think in Finding Tom, of course, you have very embodied, concrete things that people are doing. So it's a bit tough to LARP out having sex with other men in the woods without having a queer space implied.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes, but for example, that art piece, I will not, or we will not give as anyone can run it kind of a scenario, because it's easy to carnivalize the meaning of gay porn or gay sex or whatever, which I've sort of played as a joke. So it needs the presence of specifically me and Willie as the directors of it to keep it respectful and sort of understanding. Yeah.
Mark also had a question.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. One thing I would like to add one small thing to the previous discussion on queerness and non-queerness. Like I myself currently, I usually use the word normative for everything outside of queerness, because in academic work I usually encounter queerness as something that breaks this like normative context normativity. So like that's also the way I'm trying to probably decide myself to avoid binaries, because if I have queer and non-queer, it's binaries, and binaries are not really clear. That's one thing. And another thing that I wanted to ask, what, not directly on the topic, but related thing. What is your opinion on queering characters, so those of different stories, probably books, games, or whatever, who would probably their sexuality or gender was not properly mentioned in the story itself, but then for some reason they started being seen as queer. How do you feel that? What do you think about that?
Do you mean that something gets read as queer by the readers in a way?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's empowering in a way, because you don't find your representation, then you take it anyway, right? That's part of it, definitely. So done by queers, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I kind of hope that there would be so much good representation that you don't need to do that. I think it's similar to this, oh, they're just roommates thing. You know, the mirror image of that in a way, seeing what you want to see. But in terms of entertainment, why not?
Thank you.
But I don't think what readers do or experiences do is completely on the responsibility of the creator, though.
Do you have any more questions?
I actually have another kind of follow-up question to what you just said before. Do you find that like having queer game runners and organizers is like a key technique for setting up the kind of space that you're interested in with your interactive participatory art?
Actually, no. I think anyone can tell minority stories with respect. I think we all fall into this assumption that being queer somehow makes you an expert in all things queer, or me being non-binary makes me an expert in all non-binary people, but that's not true. You actually still need to do research. You still need to interview a lot of people. You need to put a lot of work into telling a story with respect. And I totally think a straight person can do this, obviously. Yes, they can. Because if only minority people tell minority stories, those stories will always be a minority because there's not enough of us. So yeah, I think anyone can do that and should.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nina, for your talk and for the discussion. Another round of applause.
Thank you.
And now we're going to have Mark present his work. Weird things to try and get this.
Do we need help?
Ooh, it's going to work out. Share screen. There we go.
Spoilers.
Oh no. Oh no. There we go.
Nice. Perfect. Okay. I can do it, whatever. Probably I can wander around the laptop and just switch the slides.
I can just press the
Okay. So, hello everyone. Nice to meet you here again, or not again, depending on how many times you've been here. My name is Mark. My pronouns are he, him. I work at Game Lab at Tampere University, and that's probably the basic thing you might need to know about me, apart from the fact that I'm a queer researcher in both senses, being a queer person and studying queerness. My main topic of studies is queerness in game mechanics from queer players' queer gender, particularly players' points of view. But obviously, to dig into that, I needed to dig into queerness. And today I have a perfect opportunity to talk a bit about queerness I've never talked about before, but some people started to dig in before me, which is no fun, no death, and no normativity for all of us. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. And several clicks. So I would talk specifically about video games because some researchers consider video games as queer as hell medium. And why so? Because at some point, Ruberg started to argue, stating that video games have always been queer as a medium, providing queer ideas, queer thoughts, and even video games about straight people, about hetero people, about cisgender people, would be video games about not straight people, not cisgender people, queer people, or queer things, because queerness in video games is not only about people. So queerness in video games nowadays, by queer game studies, is seen as bringing non-normative queer into normative contexts. And that's where I love it a lot, because on one side, it of course means bringing different character diversity and broad representation to games, but on another side, it's also challenging the norms. Because there are norms of how video games should be played, how they should be created. Every man should play Counter-Strike. Forget it. Let's not talk about that today, at least. And other things like you should play good, you should play for fun, and you should do them this way or that way. Basically, queerness in video games, queer game studies try to say that you should do what you want, and you don't have to do something because someone said it. And next slide. So today we will talk about Dark Souls. Why? Because first of all, when I talk about Dark Souls, I mean not only Dark Souls, I mean Dark Souls series plus Elden Ring, because Elden Ring is not obviously by some fan theories is the continuation of Dark Souls. Why we talk about Dark Souls today? Because first of all, it's a game of a failure. If you don't know what Dark Souls is, you might know you die thing. You might see this perfect text that appears every time when you die in this game. And failure is critical for queer game studies. I will tell a bit later why. Also because you can be cis, hetero, masculine man, this like fantastic person in vacuum and still die in the first boss. Because it's Dark Souls, you will die eventually, because we have Dark Sun Gwendolyn and many other nice characters you will see in the following slides, because of gender swap coffin, because of Arendelle and Aramis, and lots of more things that are worth studying. So let's go further. Yes, first concept we are looking into today is no fun, because you die. No fun is a concept introduced by Ruberg in 2015, and actually it means enjoying and appreciating all the experiences you get from video games. For many years, video games were seen as a source of fun, which was enjoyment in doing some like fun activity, which was done for which was meant to be interesting, but not painful, not hurtful, not sad. One should not be sad while playing video games. And queer game studies say that person is allowed to be sad, angry, disappointed, and Dark Souls will give you everything of that. Let's go further. So you have heard no fun, and Dark Souls has a lot of emphasis on negative experiences. Even Dark Souls Remastered before it was called Dark Souls Remastered was called Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition. So when you start playing it, you feel everything. And it is the first boss of this nice game. See that, appreciate that. Let's go further. The next concept is permalife and queer time. Since we have not that much of straight time today, basically permalife is the concept that is against normal death, which can end every story, which is the particular end. In Dark Souls, it happens that you die and then you wake up and go further. And again and again. This way, Dark Souls also involves queer temporality. One further. Yes, and queer time is also not normative time, not that line that we are used to, which starts at some point and ends at some point. No, queer time is either cycle or spiral or whatever, it can be eternity. And here is where Dark Souls is also a perfect queer representation game. Further, please. Thank you. We have one more. We have all the opportunities to break the game one way or another. We can spend our time not just going through the plot line, but use the master key and break how the game should work in terms of being straight way or We can wander all the beautiful map in Elden Ring, ignoring the main plot completely, because why not to sit there and watch the nice spaces? And we also have this perfect idea in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 that Aramis was painted in Arundel, and Arundel was painted after for a player because it was in the third game of the series, but Aramis was in the first game of the series. So is it a cycle? Yes, no, yes. And let's go a bit further. Of course, here we have no normativity in different ways. It can be non-anthropomorphic characters that can often be read as queer. It can be not clear plot lines that the player should interpret in the way they feel it. It can be different types of semi-anthropomorphic characters, not cisgendered characters, characters with interesting plot lines, and whatever you want to see. For example, we have, of course, Gwyndolin the Dark Sun, the perfect prince in the first Dark Souls. Then we have Radan and Mutik, and no spoilers from me. We also have Yorshka, the nice person being to some parts dragon bred, and Priscilla crossbred from the first Dark Souls. And we have several non-human characters, Shelkar and this nice priest. So Dark Souls and Elden Ring has lots of queerness, which you can study if you wish, which you can go through if you wish, and you of course can play Dark Souls. Thank you. Feel free to ask questions.
Because I was wondering, like a lot of the arguments you're putting out there are mechanics. Besides if you look at the representation of the sample on so I was wondering what your take would be to think about the narrative, or like, again, not just as this, what's the narrative and mechanics are connected, but some of very specific narrative tropes that we are seeing, how would those contribute to the experience of it as a video game?
What do you mean by specific tropes?
I'm wondering a little bit, because if coming from the more like idea historical perspective, then of course like this kind of like market development, travel, and all of that was all very like religious. It's like parallel weirdly queer project, but also because when looking at Dark Souls, and for example looking at the gender spot of it, there is this point where it also feels like with all the armor, with this message of informed body by armor, that the gender representation of the character, for example, loses relevance entirely. And where I'm not quite sure, and like also with the whole like, okay, that the character is not treated as a necessarily gendered being. If we, for example, compare that to Skyrim or whatever kind of medievalist RPG, I was wondering if there is kind of the treatment of the avatar by the surroundings. How does that? Do you have any take there? Because that is the area where I'm personally confused.
One thing that I would say, not all the series treats character as non-gendered person, because Dark Souls 3 eventually has this not quest line, I can't call them quest lines, but this opportunity to interact with NPC on the who can be married and who will be of the opposite sex to your main character. Then it's interesting that in Elden Ring you also can marry Ranni, but Ranni will still be Ranni. It doesn't matter what the gender or sex of the main character. Overall, the armor doesn't really deform the body. It deforms with the body, and it's really interesting how some armor, like female-coded armor, looks on male sex body in Dark Souls. It's a perfect combination of skirts that look so nicely on male characters in these games, and it's what I can say about the whole series. overall, the sex of main character makes not much sense in terms of plot, mostly because generally it's for all the games, it doesn't really matter how you end the game, in terms that you are not the only one. Like, one of the stories that I like in Dark Souls series is that main character is not the only one, is not the like chosen one, but one of those who could save the world or change it somehow. So that's probably one of the reasons why it's not that played, because the most important in the character is not the sex or the personality, it's the fact that the character can have the fire.
Mhm.
Can you go to slide number 3?
Of course.
This. No,
Wait, there's one.
No, actually, because one of the points that you made about like in here looking at the like what I talk about like you die, it's about failure, it's about that, and then I think the last point was about like do you is it queer to succeed? Can you change actually?
In terms of the story overall,
Story. I haven't ever played a Dark Souls game.
you can eventually change the fate of the particular world, because it is created as a multiverse for a player, where a player can change the fate of the particular world. Cannot like kill all the multiverse, because other world will have its fire burnt at some point, but you can choose the fate of your world. And in Elden Ring, it has no hints of the like overall length, because even in the Dark Souls series, it has only the small hints that it is the similar worlds with some kind of continuity. In Elden Ring, you can actually choose where the world will end.
Yeah, so you can you really don't have the power to save the world per se, as much as you have a chance to save a slim of it.
I would say the world per se can be saved in one of like fire burning endings, but I wouldn't say that it just makes its life a bit longer. So it's some kind of saving the world. Nobody knows when it will start dying again, and there are more opportunities that can eventually end up in saving the world in other ways.
That's what I was thinking about. You mentioned the queerness. It's like many queer narratives, like when they have this kind of element where you can save the world, so to speak, and that is often seen as a like fantasy of where you can like make the world a better place. And that's what I've been thinking. During this, it's about like there are these elements like about failure, about dying, and but then going back, and like it's kind of like themes of perseverance. But then can it lead to anything? Because like other thing that I obviously started to think about is like when you pointed out like every detail, and I was like, okay, yeah, it's basically Warhammer. So like, but in Warhammer you can't succeed. That's the difference. Yeah, there between Dark Souls and in Dark Souls you can succeed at something. In Warhammer you cannot succeed at that.
I think in Dark Souls, every ending is success.
Yeah.
I thank you very much for your talk. Immediately, I couldn't help but connect with Dark Souls, even though I have very little experience with the franchise in general. It's other like fanatic genre, prominent sense in Japanese game development. And my focus is on Toho project, which is well-known. And personally, what became really apparent with the dying over and over again is that from perspective of a lot of the player community, at least in Toho, and I'm very curious to the thing in Dark Souls as well, that there is this striving for perfection of having a perfect run. And that might go down to like mechanically different genres. I think that Toho usually offers much smaller levels, and it's a much smaller game in general, where that is more possible in general. But like, is there something equivalent in Dark Souls, and how that could Queerness?
I think Dark Souls does have this idea of clear speedrunning, killing no particular bosses, speedrunning some particular bosses, killing some of all the bosses only with the fist. I know the person who killed the most difficult boss in third part with the fist. It was awful. And I can say that it's rather connected or not with queerness, because at some point in community I experienced it that it was mostly done by very normative players. But then the shift of some sort happened when those normative players, I think that shift started with Dark Souls 3 because they changed PvP system at some point. And in Dark Souls 3, newer players started being assholes. And before that, there was some code of conduct between PvP players, and that was considered as a kind of untold norm. Like every person who went into PvP was supposed to do some gesture, wait while another person would do the same gesture. There were like PvP clubs, and then these like normative guys who wanted some kind of either battles or like ideal runs went to the third part and started doing PvP without those codes of conduct. And then other side started doing probably speed running, started doing different weird things. I also know one queer person who was trying to break the game several times in different ways. So I think it's kind of connected, but in different ways, probably because of overall community shift.
Yes.
I wanted to ask if you could expand a bit more on the point on the non-normative characters, specifically as example of this Finnish-made game Overkill, where the main character is this like robot, and that has been very widely kind of adopted by the community, like the queer community, and you know the robot doesn't have any kind of gender qualities or anything about it, but what do you think kind of drives this urge in queer people to like find ourselves in these non-normative characters that are either not even like human or anthropomorphized somehow? What do you think? Where does that come from?
I'm doing this study, the player study, not particularly, but including this topic. So I know opinion of some players on that. First of all, it's the similarly to what Nina said before, inability to find something similar in games overall. Many people start to search for themselves and something similar to them. One of my participants had this idea that they, in games where they weren't able to reflect themselves, they were trying to do like non-normative race, non-normative ethnicity, non-normative story, so they could have some similarity of being minoritized within the game. And with such games of Dark Souls, it has some strong stories that are similar. For example, with Gwyndolin, I appreciate this character a lot because it's a huge similarity with my experience to some extent as a trans person, because he was born in a female body, was made to be fully a female because he was meant to be a princess of sun. And afterwards, he was still Dark Moon, but Prince of Dark Moon, when he needed to protect Lordran. So that's the point that might be either interesting or reflecting for people, where they see something that is outside of overall narration happening around.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark.
I think we have a question over here from the black box of the web.
Yes. Yeah, I was thinking about this definition of queer in this context, that if it's a fantasy world and there are like non-human characters, can we say that they are queer or non-normative if they are normative in the fantasy world's norms, right? I mean, Yeah, I was thinking about this. Like, if it's perfectly normal to have talking turtles in that fantasy worlds, then they are not non-normative or queer really now, are they? So it's more putting a queer reading into that fantasy world, in my opinion, and then considering, for example, non-humans as queer representation, to me has this risk of, well, we're not really human, which is maybe not the way we want to go. I understand that people want to see themselves and so on, but I think as game designers or creators, I would maybe not do that choice. Yeah.
Thank you.
But anyway, that was my sort of a question.
Thank you for the sort of a question. I would say yes and no to both. Actually, like first of all, to the point of what is normative and what is not in a game world, there is only one talking turtle in Dark Souls, in Elden Ring, sorry. So it's kind of non-normative there as well. The similar thing is with Gwendolyn, similar thing is with dragon crossbred, because dragons were killed for being for basically being not happy with humans and with gods. So there is some kind of normativity and queerness going there as well. So I wouldn't say it's only about the reading. In many games where, for example, it is a game only about animals, or it is a game about some fantastic creatures, it is possible to say that there is a reading of something. But in these cases where the opposition exists actually, player has some reference point to start thinking about what is okay and what is not for communities of this world. And about animals, after years of communication with Terranthropes and otherkins, I would say that I personally see a huge, not current, but future issue of excluding them from queer umbrella, because at some point it already led from in smaller communication things, and it might lead for an issue with overlapping identities where a queer otherkin will exclude themselves from overall queer umbrella because they are otherkin and they were not perceived, because like if you don't perceive yourself as an anthropomorphic being, like go outside. So it's also like, for me, it's the point where it is hard to find the balance, but I myself can't agree with probably idea of thinking that if a person can feel gender dysphoria, a person cannot feel dysphoria on different levels. I would put it this way. But I do agree that for a game designer, it is a very difficult edge to start from.
Yeah, follow up on that. On Nina's last point was I think it's there is a huge power and benefit in using metaphor. I mean, in things like there's a very common trope of like the shape changers being genderly androgynous, or like queer, or robots or androids having like being described as non-binary. Those are like, I see the issues there, and I like see the issues of like dehumanization there as well. But also those things exist because that's a way to get them across. Because if you're talking about like Western media, for example, there's a huge gap what you are allowed to show, or like you get the money to show. So using metaphor to hide queer characters is a powerful method of like bringing them to the mainstream in that sense, and that's how you can get them to the eyes of the children whose parents or like family members would not otherwise be allow them to see them. So I think there's need for like many sorts of queer characters, both out and open, both human and non-human, and like real and metaphor. I also pick up on this. I think the key issue there is that there is the difference I think if you look at games which are designed to be queer and are designed by queer practitioners, like for example, this the concept of queer LARPs, and then something like Dark Souls, which I would at least assume, there's a lot of assuming there, but neither is the game series designed intentionally as queer, nor is there a high and impactful amount of like queer design. Speaking just from the fact of if you look at how such games are. So it's also this difference then I think about if we have the possibility to influence the design, then of course going with something else might be valuable, even though I would also sometimes question that depending on context. But within, I think especially within those games, those are the only characters which are available because they're the only ones which are intentionally designed to be outside of the norm, even though not is queer. I don't know if there's some nice from software data or their production context. Probably not great. If so, probably but at least I would assume that there is different from, for example, if you look at Borderlands, that you have a queer or one of the few canonically queer characters which is playable, which is specifically designed by a queer member of the team, which is also pointed out by that. So it's also probably like, okay, if there's nothing else available, take what we get. It's non-human, but we also take it.
To be sure that there's no other questions or comments on the online. Okay, and with that now, we do close our research talks. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you everyone that is also connected online. I hope to see you another time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.